Too many pretzels.
George Brett.
If we get a Dread George Brett moment, that would be great here.
Yeah, I wish I had that
at me, bro.
preloaded. Look it up, kids. And let's go ahead and get this thing rolling live. We are live. It's Thursday night. We're back with you. Football's back with you, so we're back with you on a Thursday night. Cecil Lammey on assignment. Sigmund Bloom here. Matt Waldman. Dr. Jene Bramel. And Matt, we have football.Maybe not NFL football, but give us a game update.
Yeah, I can't really because I'm watching a college game between the New York Giants of the School of the Coal Mine and the Philadelphia Polytechnic. But that game's been pretty good. They've got this plucky little young back by the name of Boston Scott, who I think he's like their third or fourth string guy, and he's like doing pretty good in terms of, pacing Philadelphia in terms of what they're doing, moving them up and down the field, screen passes and some decent runs when this makeshift offensive line can open holes. Carson Wentz, I mean, he's going to Deshaun Jackson early and often, and then it looks like Travis Fulgham's kind of heated up a little bit later on, though. There was a really nice but difficult pass in the right corner of the end zone late in the half that Fulgham wasn't able to track and went through his hands, but he probably would have been out of bounds anyway. The New York Giants University of the Coal Mines, I mean, listen, Devonta Freeman has had some creases here and there. Daniel Jones has found Sterling Shepard, who's returned to the field after injury and made some plays with that. Ingram's been hit or miss. One of those misses was a tip pass that resulted in an interception. Wayne Gallman, former Clemson back, a recent transfer through the transfer portal, I guess, if we're going to keep this going on, also fumbled a ball. So New York Giants should probably be ahead in this game, but it's up 10-7, Philadelphia. And, I would say right now you're looking at two players with, in terms of the quarterbacks, who have varying degrees of pocket impairment. I think Daniel Jones is a little bit more serious and may need some government aid, but I think Carson Wentz, he can probably get some occasional private funding, and I think he'll be okay. So that's kind of where we're at with this game.
Yeah, Wentz trying to do it all and showing the limitations of what he can do, but overall, Deshaun Jackson looks healthy and ready to contribute. Richard Rodgers had a few catches, like you said. Boston Scott moving the chains. The Eagles' offense looking better, but you did have the Golden Tate humiliating a defensive back tradition. It's that time of year
with a Danny Buffalo nickel.
Yeah, the rare nickel. Actually, sometimes. Let's get Dr. Jene Bramel here on the scene. Dr. Jene, let's go ahead and start this week with I'm sorry. Let's go ahead and start this week with Joe Mixon, because you, as of Wednesday, thought, okay, this is going to be fine. He did not practice today, although there was a report from Tyler Dragon that he was dancing. Must not be bothering him that much, that foot. He said, is this bothering you, Dr. Jene?
Not too much just yet. We've seen the Bengals in recent years. Normally, if players in Cincinnati, similar to what we've said with Pittsburgh, aren't doing much by Thursday, you start to get a little bit concerned. And I think we do need to be pretty mindful of what happens with Friday's practice participation. But I think, you kind of learn to read between the lines of beat writers over the years. And I think what they're trying to tell us when he's dancing on the sidelines, or what we heard yesterday from Ben Baby and a couple of others, saying that, okay, he's not in rehab. He's not inside getting treatment. He's on the sideline in a hoodie watching practice. Today he's dancing on the sidelines. This was an injury that didn't look particularly concerning on the field, and then he came back after halftime, after cooling off a little bit, and was productive throughout the second half. Not hearing anything about a concerning MRI finding, and certainly wasn't any discussion of maybe this is an injured reserve type situation or another. So, it doesn't have the look of a significant sprain, ankle, midfoot, what have you. And there's really nothing around the team that suggests there's a concern. Now, all this could change tomorrow. You get a Friday DNP. What could get ruled out, all of those things. But as of what we've seen so far this week, I'm not too concerned. And we're not hearing about the Bengals planning to prepare anybody else to play. So I'm anticipating that he's going to play and see pretty close to, if not his full usual workload, pending what we hear on Friday.
Gene, will Michael Thomas fantasy players who have him, will they be dancing on Sunday, or is this going to be one of those deals where we're going to have an issue? Yeah, Andrew Sauer asked the same thing. See, we're on the same page. I don't know if Daniel Jones's offensive line is on the same page, though.
Yeah, I don't like this one really at all. What I don't like about this one is there was apparently some sort of deleted Instagram post or tweet that I didn't see but was reported on, saying that Thomas himself saying he had some sort of setback, which, we all thought that his ankle was pretty close to being fully recovered enough to play 2 weeks ago before the bye. And then it was the disciplinary action that kept him out of that week 5 game. And so there was every reason to believe 5 weeks after week 1, 2 weeks after nearly being able to play, that he'd be full strength this week and ready to go. What you don't like to see in somebody with a soft tissue injury that was apparently there before practice on Wednesday, that you go through a limited practice and then don't play on Thursday. So if it was just a small tweak that happened on Wednesday, maybe they hold him out and give him a chance on Friday. This has the feel of something happened while he was finishing his rehab and sometime in the last 7 to 10 days. They put him out on the field Wednesday to see if he was able to go. He was not, didn't do much, and then doesn't practice on Thursday. So red flags all over the place with Michael Thomas. Again, this could be a situation where we're much more reassured on Friday than we are, but I don't like the way this is trending at all.
Gene, I want to let you know, Joe Warriors, it's the first time seeing Dr. Gene. The chin is no joke.
Oh my goodness.
It is no joke. Gene, you're like Jamison Crowder. You're the one good thing about sometimes questionable
I didn't know where you were going with
decisions.
That,
so
I'm like really, Jamison Crowder. I don't know how I feel about that.
The point is you stand out as a positive in a C times negative behavior and decisions. However,
we don't let Duke people in our home.
That's true. I believe that.
So, Gene, what about Crowder? He goes from limited to he does not play. We also have this extra piece of data that Adam Gase said he expected him to be limited today, but he did not practice. So what do we think about Crowder, especially given his injury history so far this year?
Yeah, I think for now that's the most telling piece of information is that it seems like this was a Wednesday injury. Gase was expecting him to do something today, whether it be a little bit of stretching or individual drills, or he was supposed to be on the field doing something. And then apparently the decision was made that he needed to be, in treatment and rehab more than on the field. Crowder is a player that doesn't need to practice to play. We've seen him play through soft tissue injuries in the past, so I don't think this is super red flag in the same way that Michael Thomas is. But this is another concerning situation where midweek injury, recent soft tissue injury already, now doing less on Thursday than was expected, is another player that you'd love to see do a whole lot more on Friday to feel comfortable with him not only playing, but getting some sort of significant enough workload to be productive this week.
Gene, we need A.J. Brown to stay healthy just because A.J. Brown is a beast when he's on the field. So what's going on with him? He didn't practice this today.
I'm willing to believe that this is a veteran day off and that this isn't a setback from a bone bruise situation. Looked fine these last couple of weeks playing. I don't see anything there that would suggest that he had some sort of setback. Always something could have happened in practice that we weren't able to see. But, Tennessee, we saw it with Jonnu Smith, who was limited and now is a full practice participant on Thursday, expecting him to play. I think there's a very good chance that we see Brown do something more in practice tomorrow. Now, Tennessee pretty routinely lists players as questionable if they have any concern at all. So don't be surprised if you see a questionable listing and something that sounds game time decision-ish after Friday's practice. But for now, I'm expecting him to play.
Okay, Gene, let's play one of those games like, at the amusement park or the fairgrounds where you roll the balls into the holes and it's like a derby, who's going to get to the finish line the fastest. You got a ton of injured players and you don't necessarily have to handle every single one, but in so much as you can make sense out of when these players are going to come back to help us. Rank, if you will, Christian McCaffrey, Miles Sanders, Dallas Goedert, Austin Eckler, and Nick Chubb.
Okay, give me those one at a time.
I'll give you the order that I expect, and we'll see if I'm right. Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, we're a couple of weeks away, but when he comes back, I think he's going to be pretty close to full strength. I think they're giving him as much chance as possible. Not probably going to see him in a Thursday night game, but I think pretty soon after that he's back. So we'll say, kind of week 9 is probably where you're going to see him.
Dallas Goedert.
Goddard, they said a couple more weeks after today, so you're looking at week 10. He's another player that this is the type of injury that if it's allowed to heal pretty well, you would expect him to be pretty full strength. So 1 week after McCaffrey, but both of them should be pretty good to go.
Austin Eckler.
Eckler, I never really liked anything about what we heard about Eckler. It was a long-term hamstring injury. It sounds like it was as close to a full tear as possible that didn't require surgery. That is a 4 to 8 week injury. There's going to be situations this year, most situations where players go on injured reserve where you think you're going to see him quickly. This is not one of them. And what we heard this week did not sound positive at all. It sounds like he's not recovering as quickly as they hoped he would. So this could easily bleed into 8 weeks rather than just 5 to 6. So you're looking probably fantasy playoffs for Eckler to be recovered by then. I think we got another 6 weeks to go with him.
And then Nick Chubb.
Chubb, I haven't heard too much about. There was a little bit of concern in the beginning because this had the look of a 4 to 6 week injury. So we have seen Chubb recover from significant knee injuries well before. There's no guarantee that this happens this time, but I think you're going to see McCaffrey probably before Chubb. But again, you hope that a player like that, and with Kareem Hunt playing well and capably, despite injuries himself, that they're going to give Chubb enough time to recover where that knee is fully stable. When he does return, he should be able to ramp up pretty quickly.
They've said he's had no setbacks and that he's been in attendance, so that's good.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect any. The MCL issues are, kind of MCL, PCL, those both have their own set of issues where, you may not feel a ton of instability in the knee joint when you move it around on exam, but a player may not feel comfortable over it. So it's not just pain necessarily. There's a measure of stiffness and there's a measure of stability that a player that is so reliant on his ability to read what's in front of him and then have his body respond. You saw his last carry where he planted that knee. It kind of gave out on him. It just tells you that he wasn't ready. And that's, we don't know when that's going to happen. There shouldn't be any setbacks with his rehab, and they're going to be careful with him, but you just don't know. Is it week 3 where some of that stability comes back and he's able to recondition? Is it week 5? So we're into a week-to-week situation at this point, and I haven't heard anything that suggests that he's going to be ready to come off injured reserve and designated to return immediately. I think this is going to turn into a 4 to 6 week thing. It'd be great if it was more 4 to 5 than 6 to 7, but we're going to figure out that when we get there, unfortunately.
Well, I would personally like to thank Nick Chubb now with more thought about this for extending his absence long enough that everyone will see who Baker Mayfield has always been. And maybe we'll be able to get a Trey Lance or a Trevor Lawrence in this derby after all. But we'll see how that goes. Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones. Watch Julio Jones closely last week. He looked good. And he looked like he was ready to become basically I made a video about it. He's ready to become basically the league record that he's always been. Like, go back to that. Calvin Ridley, I'm a little more worried about now after it seemed like he was going to take the throne. And now he's got this elbow injury. He's had so many other things going on. Is he at least going to be, a viable fantasy player for us over the next couple of weeks, or do we have to worry about him?
I'm not too worried about Ridley. I think, getting more mouths to feed. And one of the other things that Julio Jones said is that they like to get Hayden Hurst more involved as well. So, and I think that helps everybody, spreading some targets around a little bit, have more favorable targets for everybody where we're not trying to squeeze things into to certain situations. I was frankly surprised at how well Julio Jones looked last week. We hadn't heard anything from him in 5 weeks that suggested that he was feeling confident enough in his health to be able to go out and do what he did. And he, I wouldn't say that he looked fabulous, but there was acceleration there. He didn't look limited in any way. He's already talking to the media on Wednesday and Thursday, talking up other players, saying I think last week was a huge boost of confidence for him. And it was a great sign that this was the first time in a month and possibly a month and a half where he went through a full strength game speed situation without a setback. So hopefully we're getting closer and closer to this being fully behind him. I don't know that we're there yet. Hopefully we don't see any more setbacks, but another week in which Julio Jones looks as he did last week, maybe we get next week. I'm not sure when the Falcons bye is. I think we're coming up on that a little bit, but at some point where we see him ramp up his practice participation even more, because I would assume that we're going to see a limited practice and a not listed on the game status report, and we're back where we were last week. But boy, it would be great to see him fully practice on Friday and then continue to make progress from here.
Gene, it's tough out there to find a tight end. It's tough. And out of the wilderness comes Big Bob Tonyan. 3 touchdowns. Everything's looking good. Nothing looked good for the Packers last week against Tampa. But now it looks like we're not going to have him for the matchup against the Texans.
Yep, I think that's probably the case. What we know about Green Bay's medical staff is if you're not practicing, you're not likely to be cleared to play. You saw Mercedes Lewis with the DNP on Thursday as well, but it was known to be a veteran rest day, and we've seen that with Lewis off and on over time. So Tonyan is not one of those players where you would expect him to miss practice for a couple days in a row and then not play. So that's another player that I'm not expecting him to have a a positive practice participation on Friday will leave the door open for that, but I think he's clearly trending towards being inactive.
I'd kind of like to hear Bloom use that as a parody. Hard out here for a tight end for like the hustle and flow. Hard out here for a pick. I wonder if he could sing it.
Exactly.
But can
I just say real quick, I appreciate Gene. I didn't even think about the correct pronunciation. Poor Rob Tunyon, as in Funyon, hadn't really said anything because for 2 years we were saying Tanyan and we were wrong. Anyway, take it away, Matt.
Yeah, that's good. So we got Funyuns now. So we got, we have, okay, Mike Evans. I mean, that's a player who it seems like they talked about maybe being a high ankle sprain. What's going on with him? Or should we just be looking at him as a high leverage target for the next 4 to 5 weeks? Is this a guy that's going to get better enough that we should be optimistic with him like Julio Jones? I mean, when I look at this offense, it just seems like that his health is really a linchpin to determine how much, volume guys like Chris Godwin and Rob Gronkowski could wind up getting, depending on, the state of his health. And that can help people make moves in terms of whether they want to trade up, kind of acquire and buy low on a Gronkowski or something like that.
Yeah, I think Evans is probably over that high ankle sprain that he had a little bit earlier. He's played through it a couple of times. He said last week that he felt better going into last week's game than he had in the previous couple of weeks. And I haven't heard anything to the contrary this week, so I think that's going to be the case. I think this is a situation where there's a little bit of a battle of will, so to speak, here. And there's certain ways that Tom Brady wants to run an offense and how he feels comfortable, and certain ways that Bruce Arians wants to run an offense and feels comfortable. You hear Bruce Arians continue to praise really all his receivers, but he's always got lots of good things to say about Chris Godwin. And Tom Brady over the years has tended to favor slot receivers. So I think there's probably more to this than just recovering from injury. There are going to be plenty of situations where Tom Brady is comfortable going downfield to Evans, especially in and around the red zone. So I don't know that we're going to see double-digit targets routinely for Evans. I think I'd probably err on the side of expecting Godwin to have more targets for the rest of the year, assuming they both stay fully healthy. But I think Evans is going to see plenty enough targets, and I don't think his ankle is a hindrance at this point. The limited practices that we're seeing is even a little bit better than some of the missed practice time that he'd seen earlier in the year. So I'm not too concerned about Evans. I think that has more to do with what the Tampa Bay's offensive game plan is and how Tom Brady executes it more than which one of those players is relatively healthier than the other right now.
Well, can we sneak David Dodds into the facility and get him to pose as Bruce Arians so that at least we don't have he has enough smarts to let Tom Brady do what that offense needs to do? I think if we're having this issue with Arians. So anyway,
I like it. It's our football guy's caper script because Cecil's a writer, reading movies and stuff, and that's how we get our in is disguising Dodds as Bruce Arians, and then we wreak havoc.
We could do like we could have a parody of Ocean's 11.
Dodds is dozen. Gene, I don't want to make you feel like you have to say anything controversial here. All right, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I don't know if you saw Danielle Hunter's going to have surgery on that herniated disc. And I feel like this is going to go down as any time in training camp now that we see a veteran, especially if it's neck or back, and they say, it's just a tweak, everything's going to be fine, that we just won't believe it because of this. How credible is it in your mind? Because this also is tied into the big personnel move of the day, the Yannick Ngakoue trade. Mm-hmm. How credible is it in your mind, if you dare speculate, and I understand if you don't want to, that they might have thought a herniated disc that required now 6, 7, 8 weeks way later surgery was going to be okay, and that Hunter was going to be able to contribute this year?
Yes, I didn't follow this as closely as I followed some defensive players in the past, but in general, you should, I don't really like using the term injury prone, but whenever you know that there's some sort of disc condition there, there's some degenerative situations in the spine, and that is going to crop up from time to time. We've seen it. I mean, you name the position, we've seen it over the years, and it is a difficult thing to recover from. And so for that reason, players, when you hear that, you have to be concerned about them over the long and short term, especially if they haven't had a surgery yet. yet. And not that surgery is a cure-all necessarily. And players, as you've seen with Danielle Hunter, try to avoid that at all costs, trying to figure out ways to rehab it through physical therapy, try a couple of cortisone injections and see if those epidural steroids calm down the inflammation enough to allow the area to heal as much as possible so they're not as symptomatic as they were before. So I think it stands to reason that's probably what happened is they knew this was a possibility, but knew that by doing that, they were probably going to cost him 3 months, potentially the full season. So, and I'm speculating here, but why not work very hard with physical therapy as hard as you can? Go through the potential, knowing that maybe there's not a high probability that it works, but see if we can calm things down with those steroid injections, and then hope that you'll have him by week 5, 6, or beyond. And it became clear to them that probably wasn't going to be successful, and he wasn't going to be able to recover by the end of the year. And maybe Minnesota already starting to make some moves, recognizing that it's just not a season in which we want to potentially risk a couple of years on the back end of somebody's situation, and say, at this point we're pushing you to consider this as well. Ultimately, it's Hunter's decision. So, but yeah, to the original point, that whenever you hear something like this, whether it was J.J. Watt, whether it's Tyron Smith, whether it's Jason Pierre-Paul, or any number of players over the years that we've seen have these situations come up and that ultimately choose to have surgery, it is what it is. And when you hear that situation, every once in a while, the players that don't require these procedures are players that you don't hear about. There's tens of players, if not, I would say it's 100, but certainly hundreds over the years, that go through having these other medical and non-surgical treatments tried and then do fine. So that's not been the case with Hunter, and just because of the timing of the situation here is when we've heard about it the most. So I don't think there's anything that's likely particularly untoward about this situation. It's just unfortunate that Hunter at his age is already dealing with some of these longer-term degenerative situations.
Gene, tell us about the nature of Jonnu Smith's ankle injury, and even if he may play, how likely you feel like he can be a decent downfield receiver against the Steelers this weekend?
Not too concerned about Smith. It was a little bit difficult on video to tell exactly what happened, but it looked like as he was kind of, he made a trap block finishing off the play, sort of stumbling through the end of the play on a running situation, and his left ankle got caught up a little bit, and it looked like it just rolled. So those are things that sometimes there's enough pain and you just don't feel strong enough to be able to go. And I think that's what we saw. They tried to tape him up and get him to go on the sideline, and it wasn't. Poor Daniel Jones. Sniper got him. You got the offensive lineman cheering behind you for a touchdown, and I feel his pain there for sure. That's something that probably would have happened to me. So yeah, I think Smith is going to be fine. I don't think there's any too much concern there. Is it something that could be tweaked? Maybe, but full practice on Thursday didn't have the look of a particularly limiting injury, so I would imagine that you're going to tape him up and he'll be just fine.
It is the Audible Live. Dr. Jene Bramel running us down. And, this is why you tune in the NFL, right, Matt? You never know what you're going to see.
I think that Black Cat traveled with the team from last year. Yeah.
Well, it's the old stadium that there was the rumor that Jimmy Hoffa was buried under old Giant Stadium, right? Yeah. Like new meaning to Coffin Corner. And maybe there's some sort of curse there at MetLife, certainly on that playing surface.
That facial expression was just great.
Yeah.
They're even laughing.
Yeah.
The team's even laughing. That's awesome.
Thank you, Daniel Jones. And thank you, Dr. Gene. And we're going to do one more round of questions before we send you on your way. And you can fully enjoy the entertainment value of this game, Gene. My final question: is it the duty of every baseball fan that basically didn't grow up in Brooklyn or Los Angeles to root for the Tampa Bay Rays in the World Series because of the disparity in payroll?
I should have known that's where you were going with this one. You got something against the Dodgers?
I mean,
I think they're relatively easy to root for, despite the fact that they have a $250 million payroll and have won the last 8 division titles.
Yeah,
I won't be disappointed. I won't be disappointed if Kershaw does well and puts that all of that behind him. And I have no issue with I don't see Mookie Betts as mercenary-ish or whatever. I think those guys are relatively easy to root for. I think I may be wrong about that, but I don't have much of an issue with the Dodgers.
Well,
if it was the Astros, you'd be rooting for the Dodgers over the Astros, I assume.
Absolutely, anybody.
Good. Then we're on the same page there.
Yeah, bring us home.
So how much of a tragedy is Raheem Mostert's season unfolding to be? Because this is a guy, every time he's on the field, he looks extremely good. And it's he has limited time with his age anyhow. So what's going on with that?
What was frustrating about that to me is just the nature of that ridiculous 2-minute drill anyway. I think what they have 40 yards to go at the most, maybe even less than that, 25 to 30. And they had almost a full minute at the end of the half to do that. And they keep throwing these ridiculous 2-yard screen passes over the middle and outside. And he ends up getting pulled down awkwardly in one of them. And, it's just, at that point, you just wish that they had taken a knee and that poor Mostert had not been in a situation. It's just a fluke. There's nothing he could have done about that. He was being tackled from behind and got pulled down as all these ankle sprains seemed to happen. And just when, he had looked like he had gotten over the MCL issue from earlier this year, it's frustrating to me just watching that game and seeing that, we're gonna run 4-yard pattern after 4-yard pattern, and that's what Garoppolo is going to throw, advancing the ball nowhere near what their goal would be. So it was frustrating to see that happen because I like Mostert. I think he's, say what you want about Shanahan's committee backfield necessarily. I think it's been pretty evident over the last, not that Matt Breida is a poor player or Tevin Coleman doesn't bring a little bit of something there, all those players, but I think it's been pretty clear that Mostert is the class of that backfield, and it's frustrating to see that each time he seems like he is able to put his stamp on that backfield, something like this happens.
I just saw the dog in the commercial here chasing the Venza, and he just fell over imitating Daniel Jones.
Gene, you bring us compassion and you bring us, all of the sober but very accurate analysis. We cannot be swayed, and we're benefiting from you being with us here every week. Be back with me Sunday morning to get our last round of updates. Last thing, real quick, before I send you on your way, Gene. Raiders thing. I mean, we were getting kind of lulled into feeling like, oh, there's going to be stuff earlier in the week, but by the end of the week, they're going to play every game. Does this fit into that, or we watch it closely?
I think this is the first test of the new, somewhat nebulous, high-risk, close contact category and who fits into this and what does it mean, and exactly when players are going to be able to play. It sounds like that this most recent exposure to what happened with the offensive line out there is going to be far enough that if they all continue to test negative, that they're going to play. The NFL built themselves a little bit of a buffer by making the change with the Seattle and Arizona game today. But this is, if you're not sure what we're talking about related to the low and medium and high risk contacts, kind of check out my Twitter timeline. I don't know how many posts were in that thread, but there were a good 10 to 15 posts kind of defining what those things are, what the changes to the protocol was after some of the things that have happened with the contract tracing things recently. So it sounds like things are progressing well enough. Hopefully we don't have any late week positives for the Raiders that put that entire offensive line at risk. But this is another indication that players are really, and teams, and just the entire team situation is going to have to do as much as they possibly can to limit their risks of exposures, which is what we should be doing anyway. But in order to stay competitive on the field, because at some point the NFL just is not going to be able to continue to postpone games and do a bunch of shuffling on the schedule, and those games are not going to be played the later in the year we get. So I think we're rapidly coming up to the point where if this happens, especially late in the week, there's not going to be a lot of scrambling that's done. Maybe they'll open up a week 18, but we're getting closer to the point where teams may have to go out there without players, or there may just not be games being played, depending on how many players are at risk of potentially testing positive later. So hopefully everything goes smoothly this week, and as we did last Sunday, we have a Saturday night and Sunday morning where there aren't any new concerns to try to work through sort of at the last minute.
Well, as long as there are games, Dr. Gene will give you sage advice on how to handle all those medical situations around the league. Thank you, Dr. Gene.
You guys have a great week. Enjoy the rest of this game.
Why is he laughing? Give us a game update, Matt.
Well, Daniel Jones, he's got even Saquon Barkley up in the skybox, frustrated, moving and actually showing his gait with that injured knee of his. But that gave them an opportunity to go up with another score. It's up 14-10. I don't remember who scored, to be honest with you. So if you saw it, that's great, but I wasn't paying attention. So it was just I was listening more to Gene with his injury stuff.
Yeah, look, let's go ahead and first of all, I want to ask you this just real quick because this is it's Thursday night, so we can talk about whatever we want. It's fun, right? NFC East is the worst division we've seen ever, at least since we got to this 8-division format. Yes?
It's been pretty bad, and this is such a
through 6 games, through 6 weeks. Has there been a worse division that you can remember?
No, this is such a storied division, though. It's kind of interesting to see their downfall, but it's also kind of a snobby division. So I'm kind of annoyed that they're getting their comeuppance.
Yeah, because there's like prestige franchises,
they're great. They have great fans, but yeah, they've been so good for so long. It's interesting that now they're all so downtrodden with injury.
Yeah, I do think that this could still be fun because what you have is every team is so bad that they're all going to be in it until the end.
Yeah.
I was saying when we were recording earlier this week, Matt, any team that wins, because Dallas and Washington are playing Sunday, any team that wins should feel like they can win the division.
And then, but here's the question. This is what begs the question. If they're all so sorry that they're not even a winning team that wins the division, do they really deserve to go to the playoffs because they win a division?
It's not. Well, I mean, this gets into more philosophical things, right? Because, I mean, from a larger meritocratic standpoint, no, you want the best 7 teams of the conference going. But when the rules are, and teams draft for this, and teams sometimes game plan and blueprint for this, when the goal is, hey, if you're the best team in your division, you're going to host a playoff game, then that's the game. And if you get into the playoffs, and this goes back to the Beastquake, right? The last time we were having this kind of conversation was when Seattle was 7-9 and hosted New Orleans.
That's true.
And they won, and they gave us one of the most memorable moments in NFL history. So let the football gods do what the football gods do. I'm just saying I like it. I want to talk about some more like current events kind of stuff here, Matt, with football. The Yannick Ngakoue trade today, and what was odd about it is I can't remember another time that this happened. Rick's on the E, and this goes ties to Hunter stuff. So in good faith, believe that they thought Hunter could play, and they looked at adding Ngakoue as a 1-year rental, basically, for a 2nd and a conditional 5th was the right move to try to maximize their window. And now sitting at 1-5, they say the window's closed, so they sell them at a loss. They basically drop from the early 2nd to the late 3rd, and as opposed to getting what would likely be a 2022 compensatory 3rd, so you accelerate getting your benefit a year earlier. If Ngakoue gets hurt, you don't lose your expected return on him. But I cannot remember another one like this, Matt, where a team picks up a player right before the season and then mid-season pulls the ripcord because they say it's just not going to happen. Was this, I don't want to say brilliant, but was it the kind of thinking we want to see GMs do more often? Put some of your draft capital in the middle of the table and then fold and walk away with something still in your pocket? Or is this just a sign of an impulsive GM that didn't really scout his own team well enough to know that Ngakoue wasn't going to be the difference this year?
I don't think there's anything impulsive about Rick Spielman. So I would say that this was a good move just to cut your losses. But I mean, the whole
transaction of like picking someone up in August and saying, well, we'll trade him because can you remember another time when a team traded for a player and then traded him away when they saw their fortunes change?
No, I can't. It may have happened, but I can't. So, it's interesting from that perspective, but I just think that to say that Rick Spielman didn't see his team clearly, I think would be a mistake. I just think that probably they expected Kirk Cousins to play a little better.
Yeah.
They probably expected, the defense they knew was probably going to be a little more problematic and they were going to have to throw the ball a little bit more. But this offensive line has been kind of up and down in terms of protecting the passer. Because they know that Cousins is the type of guy that he really does need those, he plays bumper pool, in terms of, in terms of throwing the ball. So he needs a little bit more to his game. But I think it's been a confluence of just a young secondary that hasn't responded as quickly as they would like, along with, Kirk Cousins probably putting them in a hole a little bit earlier on some of those games where they could have easily been, 2-4, 3-3, 3-3, in this division. And so I think that's all that it really is. And with this particular season as it is, it's hard to really say because they didn't have a preseason to really assess how this team was going. Not that the preseason is predictive necessarily, right, but it does give you a feel for, like a good example is Matt Ryan, the year that they added, 2 offensive linemen in unprecedented fashion in late August through trades and ended up becoming a really good team. And Devonta Freeman had a top 10 season as a fantasy rusher. Well, it was after the Miami game in like week 3 of the preseason where Ndamukong Suh was a new Miami Dolphin at that point. And Sue was literally just in Matt Ryan's lap to the point that Matt Ryan in the preseason was like basically yelling at the bench and like playing his best Jeff George of just throwing the ball away. And they knew, like, to me, the Falcons knew, they were like, Matt Ryan's not going to sit here and like play hero ball and get his butt kicked. Like,
right.
He's basically telling us, if you want us to have any shred of a chance of a season, you better upgrade the line for me because I'm not about to be crash test dummy. And I think, and they did that. And I think that when you don't have a preseason and you have a lot of new parts to one side of the field, and then you kind of have to see what your offense can do, and especially when they're going to want to throw the ball a little bit more, I think you wind up with this kind of a situation where you just didn't have enough opportunity to see ahead. And so it's hard for me to blame Spielman too much, with this unusual year.
That's fair. I mean, it's fair. Matt, I think even just being around the building with the team and going through a few cycles of like a game and watching their film and just seeing how the team is different in a way that is easy to compare to previous years is an important piece of information too.
And one other thing I'll just add about that, Russ Landy made a really great point on my podcast about 6 months ago during the draft, saying that, the Vikings decided to trade, basically trade with a lot of people and get a lot of late round picks and get them because it was a move to acquire players that they might have more trouble trying to get off of free agency. Like, they were aggressively picking late round guys to get them and make sure that they could sign them and have deals with them for, a little bit more money, but they were making a shrewd move not to have to compete with other people for UDFAs because of the nature of what was going on in camp and things like that. So, I think on the whole, I look at Rick Spielman and I think he's a good GM. So I would, I'm more inclined to have reasons for him why this didn't work out as opposed to point the finger at him.
Well, that's fair. And we could point the finger at him for the Kirk Cousins extension anyway.
Right.
Should people want to add Antonio Brown to their fantasy teams?
Yeah, I mean, if you have the luxury, and I think that when I have somebody asked, does he still have it? Well, I think the answer is that until he proves that he doesn't, he does. I mean, even when he moved over to New England and everything was erratic for him in terms of his behavior at that time, he still performed well in that one game. So I think you have to understand this was a player who was at the top of his game. There may be some rust. There's going to be adjustments with, being on the same page with a player. The bigger question is really what you're looking is what you should expect from him right now. And I would say, depending on the team that he's going to, you should be looking at him as a player you should grade probably about a tier and a half lower than what you think his absolute upside would be. So if you think he's an elite wide receiver 1 in terms of talent, you probably should be thinking of him as a high-end wide receiver 3 at best right now, mainly because of the adjustments that he's going to have to make with the team and what type of role he may have midseason and the time off that he's had, which can make him a little bit more prone to injury. We should probably treat this a lot like Josh Gordon because we really should, because as good of a work ethic that Antonio Brown has, guys with great work ethics also are guys who have great routines in terms of, they're creatures of habit. They like to have good routine. And if they haven't had much of a routine to lock into for the past, year and a half, you're going to see some issues with that. Whereas a guy like Josh Gordon, I mean, there's a lot of things he does very refined, but I would say if you're going to look at the true nature of talent on the level, and Travis Fulgham just made a spinning catch and got them inside the 10. He's starting, he was heating up earlier in the half. Now it's late third quarter and he's starting to, but Gordon might be one of the examples of those guys that I'm sure he worked at his craft because it certainly looks refined, but at the same time, he might be the nature of those rarities where when people say talent's nothing but a lot of work, that's,
right,
basically put into it, he might be that exception to the rule. And if a guy like Gordon can come in and do pretty well, but not be the guy he was when he was, had that one season in Cleveland, I think with Antonio Brown, you kind of have to expect that, some adjustments there. He'll be a viable option, but what you're picking for him is hoping that by playoff time, he's playing like a wide receiver 2 or a low end wide receiver 1. And you're going to have to wait a good 5 or 6 weeks to see whether that happens. So if you don't have time to wait, picking him up is an extreme gamble.
Okay. The maybe more fascinating question, Matt. Should an NFL team want to add Antonio Brown?
I don't really know enough about the situation to think that it's fair for me to comment, other than that what Drew Davenport has told us about the nature of the legal system and what that means for players, and that he's most likely been compliant. Drew's done a great job on our Football Guys thread this summer about Antonio Brown, and would just say that he's obviously been compliant. He's probably taking some sort of medication that will drive some sort of mood disorder that he might have. And if that's the case, that getting adjusted and working through that has been a big part of his time. And the fact that he's been compliant is a good sign. Mm-hmm. So I would just say, from an NFL standpoint, I would say it's, while it's not my place, I would say at the same time, if the Dallas Cowboys can bring Greg Hardy into a locker room, and other teams could bring a Greg Hardy into the locker room, and other players who've been, guilty of other, behaviors, or have, it's pretty clear that they've been complicit in that, I would say, Antonio Brown's fair game right now as well. And I would just say, if you don't like it, then change the laws. November's coming up.
Yeah. I mean, and there's a certain kind of code. That's why they say football character and things like that, where I think in the locker room, all that stuff is left outside the locker room. We'll just see. I still swear that Antonio Brown cursed the Patriots season last year. There was some sort of black magic that happened because of how all that went down, and it cursed them. That's for another show, maybe a non-football show. Okay, let's move on to some Matt Waldman content. Footballguys.com subscribers, you get access to all this good stuff. DeAndre Swift. And as we get into the bye week gauntlet, Matt, we hope that teams use the bye week to reassess, maybe reprioritize players. And certainly Detroit, coming out of the bye last week, did give DeAndre work. He had a tremendous game. If you had DeAndre Swift and you were holding him, and maybe even bold enough to put him in the lineup last week, you're feeling great, and you're certainly looking forward to putting him in the lineup this week. Of course, keep in mind it was Jacksonville, a team that's disintegrating before our very eyes, and actually Joshua Kelly, a Waldman favorite, gets to attack them this week. This week, Detroit goes down to Atlanta. When you put the jeweler's eye on and you looked at Swift last week, what did you learn, and how can it help people?
Well, it was really fascinating to watch Swift, because I thought he was one of the most difficult running back evaluations that I've seen last year in that class, because a lot of people would look at him and say from just a cursory glance, oh, he's easily a guy who's capable of contributing in the NFL lineup. And I'd say that's true. But when you look at his metrics, he became polarizing for a lot of people, because his athletic ability doesn't match the template that the combine actually puts out for running backs. The last running back who didn't really match that template well, but plays at extremely high level, is Dalvin Cook. So sometimes you have to understand that, that players aren't going to match that template. And like Dalvin Cook, DeAndre Swift is very good at curvilinear movement, kind of bending angles around defenders. When he can make cuts where he's keeping his feet on the ground, he's very sudden. He has good build-up speed, but he doesn't have great acceleration, initial acceleration. He has great quickness. So when you see all that, people really, when I say all those things, people are going to sit there and say, well, no, I think he's got great speed, or I think he's got great quickness, and you'll see a polarizing kind of viewpoint when it comes to his athletic ability, because of the fact that it's hard for people to get a close look at that or discern what's going on between the metrics and the tape. As a result of that, he's a player that I think should watch a lot of Dalvin Cook. The problem is he's watching a lot of Adrian Peterson because Peterson's in practice and he's working with him. And the things that DeAndre Swift doesn't do as well as he does with the feet on the ground, pressure cuts, curvilinear movement, is jump cuts and jump stops. When he leaves his feet to set up a cut, he's not quite quick enough to really do that. And he's also not pressing the crease as well as he should. And that's something that Adrian Peterson lives and dies by. And so, he's in camp. He's watching Adrian Peterson in practice and working with Adrian Peterson and probably learning a little bit from him, but he might be learning some of the wrong things. So for his style. Right. So when you watch him, he was kind of, he had several runs against Jacksonville of 5 to 19 yards that were good. But there were a lot of runs that he left meat on the bone because he was trying to jump cut and jump stop, or he wasn't pressing the crease as well as he should. And those are some things you saw on his tape. So I would say he still has things to learn. And when you watch Atlanta this week, this is going to be a pivotal game for him, because if you see him refrain from all the jump stops and jump cuts, and you're going to realize how quick of a learner he really is. And if he's that quick of a learner, then I would say you'd have a better chance of saying he's an every week player. But right now, I don't believe that's going to happen. I think Atlanta is a team that they have what you call run and hit defenders. Deion Jones, Keanu Neal, AJ Terrell played well last week as a tackler. Athletic guys who can get downhill and force the action and make collisions. Those types of players are the type of players that are going to get the best of DeAndre Swift if he's using all these jump stops and jump cuts. And I think Atlanta's playing better football that they were able. I don't think if Dalvin Cook was on the field last week that it would have made a lick of difference for how the Falcons played and was able to stop the Minnesota Vikings run game. So if Atlanta stops Swift this week or limits him, I think then you can say that the template is that he'll help you between weeks 10 and 13, where he gets to face teams like Carolina, Houston, Chicago, and Washington, where they don't have a lot of run and hit guys or guys who overreact to getting out of their gaps like Houston does. Zach Cunningham's been baited a couple of times by Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and then you saw the 94-yard run with Henry last week. So if that's the case, weeks 10 to 13 are good for him. The rest are really you're hoping for bye-week production out of him as kind of a what-the-heck flex.
Yeah, I think that's a good breakdown. I just like the idea of laying out of observations and then a hypothesis, and then if this hypothesis ends up being true, what are the implications of it? And that's how you do good analysis, and also just make actionable things that you do observe. And that's what you get every week with the check and the top 10. Again, folks, Matt Waldman. And of course, Matt Waldman, RSP, drink. Everyone's enjoying the Audible drinking game tonight. And in the NFC East divisional matchup, it's time for drinking games. It's also getting to be time for the trade deadline. And because of the COVID regulations, really when you trade for a player, depending on the timing, chances are you're not going to have them until the following week's game. So maybe we see a little more urgency there, Matt. But when I say trade deadline, it can be a player you want to see traded. It can be a team that you want to see addressed in a position. It could be a team that you want to see go to an all-out fire sale, or a team that you feel like if they can get this kind of piece, maybe things could be different, because the teams are getting looser now about trading. Like we said, the moves that Rick Spielman made is kind of unprecedented. So what's something that you would like to see or would excite you to hear about with the trade deadline coming up?
I'd like to see Miles Boykin dealt out of Baltimore because I think Miles Boykin is a much better receiver than how he's used. He's not a good fit for Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson is just not a high velocity timing route thrower, just in the same way that the Sean Watson isn't a high velocity timing route thrower. So if you're going to put them on the perimeter, and I mean that more for the perimeter, and that's Miles Boykin's game. Like Miles Boykin, deep outs, deep comebacks, deep curls all day long. He could feast off of that. I mean, look at Travis Fulgham right now.
Right.
And
I was just going to say that.
Yeah.
Just going to say that. I
would say that, Miles Boykin is not much different than Travis Fulgham, except that he's faster, bigger, and stronger.
Right.
So I would say I would love to see him go elsewhere. I would, from a fantasy perspective, I would have selfishly liked to see Kareem Hunt get traded, but there's no way that's happening. But another situation would be good. I'd like to know who you're thinking of, actually, come to think of it. Is there anybody that comes to mind for you?
Well, one of the things I will say is Baltimore making this deal, and it was Jeff. I'm not exactly sure how you say his name. Zrebiec.
Yeah.
The writer for The Athletic actually this morning laid out that he expected the Ravens to be looking for a pass rusher, that they were previously interested in Ngakoue, and they tried to get that Clowney deal done. So, really prescient there. Obviously one of the things that comes to mind is the Steelers and Devin Bush. I'm not really sure who's out there as an off-ball linebacker that would be a good fit. I made up a nickname for Robert Spillane, the Hammer. The Robert the Hammer. He was a hammer out there, and I think the first thing you try to do is find someone in-house. John Ross is an interesting guy. I think we all want to see the Patriots get a receiver. So I'll make that my answer, Matt, is I want to see the Patriots, whether it's A.J. Green or John Ross, one of the Bengals rejects, or Miles Boykin. Cam Newton can make more use of that traditional X receiver winning on the boundary. Why not?
That's a great idea. In fact, I was thinking about this a few weeks ago and I forgot all about it. And it was one that was trying to come to mind. And you jog my memory is AJ Green. I wanted to see him traded to Atlanta. And the reason I wanted him into Atlanta is I'd like for them to use him as a slot receiver. Oh. I think AJ Green as a slot receiver would be absolutely fantastic, but they have Tyler Boyd in that capacity right now, and he's obviously a great fit for that. But imagine, doing that. But the problem is Atlanta's not in a contending window, so it really doesn't make any sense for that to happen. I'd like to see Curtis Samuel traded to another team. I think it'd be fun to see.
Another Patriots one.
Yeah, he could be a good He'd actually be a very good Patriot. That would be a perfect example of that. I think he has more to learn than what people have analyzed him to, to be like this great, type of breakout guy, who's coming. But at the same time, I think he's better than what his stats show right now. So yeah, those are a couple that come to mind.
It should be fun. I think that we'll get a few things that release some adrenaline, get us all buzzing. Not sure what. And we already got one to analyze and think about our as we round out the show here on a Thursday night. Thanks everyone for coming out. I want to look at a couple of your top 10 items. It's a Broncos show, even though Cecil's not here. Let's talk a little Broncos. And this is one where my oversimplistic pedestrian analysis, I think, sometimes can make an elegant intersection with your very erudite and learned analysis, because we've been watching Drew Lock, right? And sometimes I think the term on Twitter is like the shower narrative. I'm not even really sure what that means. It shows how old or out of sync I am. The idea that, hey, Drew Lock liked to throw to Albert Okwuegbunam, playing the audible drinking game shouldn't be, when you're saying Okwuegbunam, not a good idea. So Matt, it was like 17 touchdowns in 2 years they hooked up for. They drafted him, and it just made sense that Locke would lock in on him. And sure enough, when Noah Fant is out last week and Locke is on the field, he gives Alberto 4 end zone targets. None of them connected, but is this the kind of thing where very simple analysis of this carryover. And I'll throw out there that Drew Lock is not an extension of the offensive coordinator kind of quarterback. He's kind of playing it his own way. Do you see some lasting value here, and is it indeed worrisome for Noah Fant?
Yes, I thought so when they drafted him because Albert O, I think, is actually a better tight end than Noah Fant. I think Noah Fant's
More
a better
athletic,
athlete.
or as athletic?
As athletic in different ways. Now, Fant can bend a little bit more, and some people were worried about the tightness or lack of mobility or flexibility with Albert O, but Albert O really did a better job with underneath routes than Noah Fant ever has, and he actually wins the ball better than Fant has too. Now, you might say, well, he didn't do anything with those 4 red zone targets, but he drew an interference call. He had one that he nearly came down with, but the defender basically knocked the ball away, and one where his hands just didn't get up technically as strong as he should have. But it was his first game. He did make a couple of nice plays, on an over route and then on a flat route. I think that, as his first game ever in the middle of the season, I would say he didn't do too bad. There's promise for more with him. And the problem is with Fant fights the ball. He overthinks it. He's kind of the Robert Meacham of tight ends in terms of great athlete, but has to do math trying to get position and catch the football. And they do a lot to scheme him open. Like the Broncos, one of the things that I love about the Broncos offense over the past couple of years is that they do a lot of work they do a lot of creative plays to get the guy open they want. Now, they may only be able to use the play once a week or once every other week because, it becomes predictable, but the plays that they use work well. And they had to do a lot of that with Fant. So Fant can still be a useful player, but I don't think he's ever going to become like an all-pro or a Pro Bowl caliber guy. And I think Albert O has the chance to become a go-to guy in this offense, mainly because I think you'll see him improve as a red zone threat and be able to make good on many of those plays. And yeah, he's got the deep speed too, and what he can do underneath. He's just a little more versatile player.
And when I see Fant, even go back to Iowa, Matt, a player that it's brought to mind is Jared Cook, just for some of the same types of reasons you're talking about, where there's all of this athleticism, this incredible prototype package, but the skills and the feel for the game just aren't there to unlock all that value. Although we did see Jared Cook near the end of his career start to harvest more of that, at least in terms of fantasy value. As we're watching here, the Giants closing in on the win. Chaos here, trying to close it out in the NFC East. And as I was saying, Washington wins. Then we'd have everyone with half game going into week 8. So it can still be entertaining. Any parting thoughts as we've had a NFC East Thursday night, Matt?
It's just, I just think, I'm just glad that we're having NFL games. And I think that they've been entertaining. I think that's been good football overall. Yeah. And even if you're a conspiracy theorist and say that they've eased up, they've told the refs to ease up a little bit on some of the holding penalties and different things that would likely happen so that they could have a little more offense and a lot less stoppage. Whether that's the case or not, I don't care. I'll put my tinfoil hat on and say I enjoy it if that's the case. But yeah, Daniel Jones just threw his touchdown to Sterling Shepard. Look at that. Sterling Shepard got himself a little welcome back gift. Mm-hmm. So there you go. And, that's it. I'm take the little things and, getting a chance to watch football is one of those little things that we should be very thankful for.
Absolutely. Shared experiences. And gives us a chance to connect because we don't have as many opportunities to connect as we used to. It's always great to connect with Dr. Gene, with Matt Waldman, with Cecil Lammey on assignment tonight, with everybody in the chat room. Like, subscribe. Certainly, folks, we appreciate your support on YouTube. We appreciate your support on the podcast and supporting footballguys.com and otherwise just sharing the journey. So we'll be back Sunday morning. Of course, we got you covered at footballguys.com, got you covered on the Audible because you're